Welcome. In this demonstration, I will show how to draw an old tree with a ridged bark. So essentially what happens is that, when a tree gets old, or some trees, they have those ridges on their bark. And that is really interesting to capture and draw. So essentially those ridges, they have a lot of visual interest. And you can easily have a nice drawing, a nice composition around that, such a tree. So essentially, that tree will be up close. So what we want to show are those ridges on the surface of the tree, the bark. So what I did was to draw a kind of, a tree that is a bit up close. So I drew the size of the trunk bigger. And what we will now do is to essentially draw the ridges on the surface of this tree and essentially bring out its character. And the way we do it is to essentially, first you can outline the ridges that you want to draw with the dotted line. And then what you do essentially is to use these parallel lines to create ridges like this. And by ridges, I mean that kind of, surface imperfection, something like this. So that, is present on the surface of old tree. So this is how you do it. Essentially, to draw a ridge, start and end at a point. And then what you do is you use these slightly angular curved lines to indicate a ridge. So this is it. So this indicates that kind of, surface imperfection in the form, indicated by this line. So that's essentially what you do in this approach. So you just draw, these ridges on the surface, and in the end you have a feel for in an old tree with this kind of ridges on its surface. So we'll add few more. So essentially, simply use a dotted line to lay down your initial ridge angle and orientation. So essentially, you want to have ridges in different, orientations. So some like this, some small, some little bigger. So essentially, just mix and match these different ridges to get a nice feel for the kind of, surface imperfection for your old tree. And so that's what I'm doing over here. So I just essentially drew a line, and over here I have a ridge. I will have a small ridge over here. So essentially something like this. So this is something that, you can choose depending on what you want, the kind of feeling you want for your tree. So you can have a lot of ridges, or you can have, few big ridges or few small ridges, or anything in between. So something like this. So what I'm doing now is just, adding a bit more ridges and essentially, orienting them in different ways and using different sizes and things like that. So that's the core. The core of the technique is to use a stroke, like this, to create a ridge, and then you orient them in different ways and use different sizes and things like that. So this is oriented towards this side, right? To orient a ridge towards this side, what you will do is essentially kind of, draw the line something like this. So that will orient, this is now like this, so it is oriented, in this way. So essentially, just orient your ridges in different, ways and use different sizes to essentially, add nice, feel to the, kind of ridged bark for your tree. And what you can also do is essentially to add even kind of crevices or something like that. So for example, I just add a hole over here, and then I fill it, something like this. So now this is a crevice. And you can also do is essentially, kind of, draw a kind of boundary around it, so that shows that it's a deep crevice, and then just simply use the line to add a bit of shading around it, something like this. And then you can even kind of just add a bit of parallel lines around it, something like this. So this is how you can easily again add a kind of hole in the bark of the tree as well. So this is something we can add one more over here. So for example, I draw initially. So again, do not make it circular, right? So we are making a bit irregular shape, and then use the parallel lines to make darken it. So essentially the inside of that hole will be dark, and then essentially define a boundary around it. Again, you keep it irregular. So and then just simply use the parallel lines to create a bit of tone for that boundary, something like this. And then we have it. So this is how you can then just add a bit more lines around it. This is how you easily create kind of crevices or holes on the surface of the trunk. And what we will do again is to add a bit more of these kind of ridges, something like this. And if you want, you can add smaller ones over here, bit bigger ones over here, something like this. And it's always good to have a bit big ridges at the base, something like that, so that adds more visual interest. So that's what I will do. I will add one big ridge over here, one big ridge over here, and something like this over here. So as you can see, this is oriented in this side, this is oriented in this side, and there are different sizes, different orientations, and together they're giving a nice feel of this bark as ridged. And at this point, if I want, I can add even more, right? So I can add even smaller ridges in the center, something like this. So it all depends on you as to how much you want to cover the bark with these ridges. But these this is the main element, main theme in this bark structure, is to have these ridges. So this bark, essentially another demonstration, we have seen how to kind of draw this kind of outline for the different bark pieces, something like this, and then we saw how to kind of even texture them to create a kind of bark detail. So that was one approach we saw in other demonstrations. Over here what I'm showing is a different way in which you can create a bark that is ridged and give a feel for a kind of old tree with this ridged bark, something like that. So there we have it. The other thing you have to also keep in mind is to make the one end of this ridge darker than the other. So right now, this ridge is not really giving out a nice form, because, as we have seen, when anything is circular or round, you have to have, one end darker than the other. So what that means is that when you create a ridge like this, you need to go back and make one end darker by adding more parallel lines like this over here. So now what is happening is that now this ridge has more of a feel for roundness, because one end is darker than the other. So that's something that you have to do for your ridges as well. So again, to give you an example, so I create a ridge like this. Now this ridge, is showing the overall kind of orientation and stuff like that, but it's not really giving a feel for the volume. It's not giving a feel for the roundness, and that's because the tone over here and here are the same. But if we add one more layer at one end and make it a bit more darker, something like this, now you have a more sense of the roundness, because one end is dark and the other is light, and that is how our mind perceives of something as round. So that's what we have to do. Once we create these initial ridges, then I go back and I will darken one end of these ridges more. And as you will see, that will bring out more of the roundness of these ridges. So essentially, these ridges are round, right? So these are kind of those round surface imperfection we have on the bark of the tree. So we have to darken their one end more to bring out that roundness. So this is similar to what we have seen in the overall trunk, in other demonstrations. And over here, what we are doing is essentially focus on these individual ridges on the bark, and we are doing the same treatment, right? Making one end darker than the other to essentially bring out its roundness. So that's what I will do over here. And I will go ahead and again, the technique is the same. It's just that, the second step, I am just darkening using the second layer only over the half. So I just use over the half of the ridge, and the other half is left as before. So this becomes light, and by adding more lines over here, we are making it darker, and that difference in tone creates a nice feeling of roundness. So that's what I'm doing over here. So now you can see that by adding a bit more darkness to one end of a ridge, now it's beginning to kind of acquire a nice feel of roundness, and that is giving the bark a real nice character of a ridged bark. That is very common for the old trees sometimes. I'll go ahead and add a bit more something like this. So now our ridges are acquiring a nice dimensionality. They're looking more rounded, and that is giving it nice feel for the bark. So something like this. Again, add more to one end to darken it. So there we have it. So this is now a nice ridged bark we have, and at this point, if you want, you can add more ridges, or what you can do is you can simply add a bit of dot here, bit of some marks like this, just to kind of reduce the white a bit. So the white, there is a lot of white in between. So sometimes that looks interesting. That actually is kind of providing the contrast, so your ridges are standing out more. So you can leave it like that, or if you want, you can add this bit of dot, or very small ridges. So even you can use in something like this, something very small, imperfection and things like that. You can even add more of these holes if you wish to, right? So there are all these different combinations you can do. So essentially the goal, the main focus of this drawing is is to create a bark that is ridged, and this is the way you do the ridge. And then you can add them in different orientations, different sizes, and then finally you can just cover the white by adding a bit more smaller ridges or some other dots and some other just crevices. You can even have it like a hole like this, right? A hole like that. So as we have seen, to make the crevice, use it irregular shape, something like this. So do not make a square shape, right? So this doesn't this is not how the holes will be in perspective. So something like this is a nice shape for a hole, something like this. So use these kind of shapes and these kind of darks to essentially indicate some kind of crevices if you want as well. And lastly, what you can also do is to essentially make the edge also a bit rough. So we always make our edges jagged, right? So essentially this doesn't convey any kind of roughness on the edge, but just by adding a bit of dark, something like this, you can add a kind of roughness to the bark. So that's what we will do over here, is to just add a bit of roughness like this to the edge of the bark, the trunk, and then we'll do the same on the other side. So essentially, when you have it line like this and line like this, that's just add a bit of something like this. So it indicates a kind of hole or some kind of imperfection or some kind of break in the edges, something like that. So that's what we will do. I'll just simply add a bit over here, a bit over there, and if you want, you can add a bit more crevices. So again, just start by laying down your ridges, and then after you have done the ridges, then you can essentially add a bit more holes and a bit more kind of dots or sometimes crevices and things like that to give it a more finished feel. So there we have it. So now our bark is looking like an old ridged bark, and you can also make the roots now more prominent. So in our other demonstrations, we essentially literally kind of have the root at the base. We simply kind of have the trunk like we had a trunk like this, and I simply kind of just made the grass and other kind of structure like this at the base of the trunk to ground it. Over here, what we can do is actually have some of the roots showing. So essentially what you do essentially use a shape something like this. So again, taper it, right? So the roots will be tapered. So essentially you taper it something like this, and then we can have one more root, something like this over here. So this is how you can essentially, take out the roots of the tree, and then these roots will be a little bit rounded, right? So they will be kind of, same as ridges. So we need to use the same technique of using this kind of angular, not angular, sorry, this kind of, rounded lines like this. So again, what the concept is that, if you want to create a kind of rounded ridge, you create these rounded parallel lines, something like this. This brings out the shape of the line, indicate the kind of roundness you have for the ridge. And you always have to start and stop at a point, and this is the perspective, right? So this is the ridge will stop at a point, and start and stop at a point, and this is how you do it, right? And if you want to make a bigger ridge, then you can either increase the length or increase the size, so for example, if I want to make a short ridge that is very wide, I'll start like this and then go very wide, something like this, and then stop like this, right? So this is different shape for a ridge. So a lot of different possibilities are there in terms of how you size your ridge, how you orient them, and things like that. So so you can essentially use that to make any kind of tree very unique in terms of having its own ridge shapes and orientation. And we will use the same kind of rounded parallel lines to essentially bring out the aspect of the root as well. And again, what I'm doing is darkening one end over here a bit more, just to give it a bit more shape for the roundness, right? So giving it the fall. Then I will use the same for this root as well over here, something like this. And again, I will go ahead and add a second layer on the one side to essentially darken it more. There we have it. So now we have a nice indication of the part of the root that is above the ground. And this is the thing that you will find in most of the old trees, is that they have big extensive root structure, and sometimes part of it that is above the soil. So I did the same, and again over here I'll go ahead and kind of add a bit more to one end to again bring out its fall. So there we have it. And at the end, you can always extend the ridges a little bit more over here. So there's a lot of white over here, so what I can do is add some more ridges over here, right? Something like this over here, a bit over here, something like this, and then just add a bit more dots. So again, where there is white, you can either add a ridge or just go ahead and add some kind of marks, something like that, to kind of take away the excess white, right? And over here you can again add a bit of crevice, something like this over here. So this is how you can define a nice kind of bark, ridged bark, that has a very visual appeal, something like this. And you can also leave some white, because these whites, they tend to contrast with our ridge. So essentially the ridge, they stand out and they are more prominent because there is some white. So do not cover the white extensively. So you want the whites to be covered in the sense that we do not have a very open white sense of open white, but yeah, just bit dot here, bit dot here, this covers the white enough to kind of give them a nice appearance, so that the white is not kind of standing out, but rather kind of in the background, and is providing a nice backdrop for our ridges to stand out. So something like this over here. And then over here I can again add a bit of jaggedness to the edges of this root as well, just to kind of give it a nice character. So again always kind of add, give a bit of jaggedness to the edges, so like this, because they kind of adds more interest, and also kind of is more plausible. So you never have it like an edge that is fairly straight and without any kind of imperfections. So something like this, I will just again go ahead and bit something like this. So this is great now, and what we will do at the end is essentially, at this point there are a lot of options, so we will add some kind of ground cover, and if you want, then you can even add in a kind of, a fence, or you can have a backdrop or anything of that kind, right? So my aim was to kind of show how you can create a ridged bark, and this is a great kind of, backdrop, or kind of, this can even be the main element to any drawing, and then you can have a lot of other backdrops that you can add to it. So what I will do in this demonstration is to simply add some kind of, wildflowers in the ground cover, so something like this. Again, to add the wildflower, simply draw a stem like this, then draw a flower, and then just add a wiggle at the base to kind of ground it. And we have seen this in a lot of other demonstrations. So that's what we will do over here, right? So I'll just add a bit of wildflowers over here, some over here, some over here. So this will provide a kind of nice grounding to our tree, something like this. And over here, a bit over here. And again, there are a lot of other elements you can do as well, right? So you can either have a kind of fence, or a lot of backdrops, and other trees are possible as well. But I won't really go into detail, because we have seen those covered in a lot of other demonstrations, right? So you can use that technique, that I discuss in those demonstrations, and apply them in your drawing as well. So here simply, I will just add a bit of flowers over here to the base. And then what I will do is to essentially add a lot of grass around here, just to give it a nice grounding. So as we have seen, to ground a tree, you always have to have the base a bit darker. So I added the flowers, and then next I will go ahead and use this kind of grass stroke to essentially ground all these flowers, and also to create a nice grounding of the trunk itself. there we have it. So I'm simply just adding a bit of grass over here. So again, just very simple, add something like this, right? And over here, since this is close up, this is very, the trunk is quite close to the viewer, I'm using a bit bigger stroke for the grass. So we saw another demonstration that the size of the grass reduces with distance, right? So you always have to keep the perspective in mind, and anything that is at a distance will be smaller compared to the same element when it is closer to the viewer. And over here, our element doesn't really have a lot of distance. Our drawing doesn't really have a lot of distance as such. We are just really focusing on this, old ridged tree. Old tree with the ridged bark. So essentially what I will do is just use a bigger grass just to ground it. And again, adding this a dark around the base is very important, because that is what essentially, grounds the tree. So this sense of kind of foliage and the kind of dark foliage and this kind of ground cover indicates that, that there's a grounding of that trunk. So that's what we have to do over here as well. So essentially, when the root disappears, I will again darken it a bit just to give it a nice sense of grounding of the so essentially what happens is whenever anything disappears, you need to have a plausible explanation for why that is disappearing, and that is because if there is a lot of ground cover and the ground under which that root is going. So I'll just darken it over here, and that that gives a nice kind of feel for the grounding of the the root and the trunk overall. And then I will again darken over here a bit more, so I'll add more grass. And again, you just keep adding grass, and in between, if you want, you can leave a bit light. So over here, you can leave a bit light, but those areas right next to the root, darken them to give a nice appearance of the grounding of this trunk. So that's what I'm doing. It's simply adding more grass over here, a bit more over there, and same over here, right? So this is now beginning to ground our trunk nicely. So again, this tree can be, you can just have a drawing like this. So this is a nice simple drawing. We did it under 20 minutes, even under 10 minutes. And yeah, I mean, this kind of rich structure looks very appealing, so that's why I wanted to share this demonstration with you, is that, you can see how just by using this kind of, technique, you can easily draw these ridges, and they kind of, convey a sense of, bark for the tree, and then you can add a bit of, other imperfections, something like this over there, to have a nice, tree, an old ridged tree as the main focus of your drawing. So this is something you can do by itself, or if you want now, you can use that as your one of the main elements, and then you can have other elements as well over here, right? So you can, if you want, draw a river and have this reflection that we have seen in other demonstrations, or you can have some kind of backdrop, or you have other trees and things like that. This is a real simple fun drawing to do, creating kind of ridged bark. And the other thing is that, yeah, there's so many variations. So anytime you will draw another ridged tree, it will be different, just because you will use different placement for the ridges and different orientations and things like that. So it's always it's very fun to do, and a very simple, pleasing drawing that you can do anytime. So let me just quickly finish this grounding of this trunk. So again, I'm just kind of add a bit of dark kind of foliage all along the roots, just to kind of give a sense of the roots being grounded, and that will essentially give a feeling for the whole trunk grounded as well. So I'll just add a bit more over here. So now this is looking like a nice old ridged tree. There we have it. And as you can see, some of these whites, they contribute to the overall feel, right? So those whites, they bring out the ridges. So in a pen and ink, it's always a matter of contrast. So your white and darks are always relative. So if I make this area too dark, what will happen is that my ridges will not stand out that much. So I always like to leave a bit of white around the ridges, so that at least that makes the ridges stand out and kind of essentially give them prominence. And that is kind of what we want. So the ridges are the main prominent aspects of our bark over here. So we want to leave some white around them to kind of make them stand out. And there we have it, right? So I'm almost done. So this is how I just quickly grounded my root, and that grounds the overall trunk. So essentially just add this grass stroke along the root that is outside, and if you want, you can add a bit more over to the ground over here as well. And then you can add a bit more flowers if you want. So this is a nice simple composition that you can do anytime to create a kind of ridged bark for an old tree. And yeah, make it a have it either as the main element of your drawing, or make it a part of drawing with other elements in it. But it's a very simple fun drawing to do that you can do in under 15 minutes and enjoy doing it anytime. Thanks. Bye bye.